Hello mga learners! Welcome back! Now that you have an idea of what composting is, we can discuss what you will need to make compost. After this lesson, you should be able to identify the things needed to make composting successful, identify the organic materials that can be used for composting, and identify the organic materials that cannot be used for composting. Composting has certain requirements. These are needed to ensure that composting will be successful. Biological process. A decomposing agent is needed for the materials or waste to decompose. Did you know that the best decomposing agents are worms? Compost worms can speed up the decomposition of organic materials. Worms are attracted to the warm temperature in compost heaps. As soon as they appear, their population doubles within a month. Carbon and nitrogen. Carbon can come from dry materials like leaves, woody waste, sawdust, and straw. It serves as a source of energy for the microorganisms, bacteria, and of course the worms in compost heaps. Nitrogen, on the other hand, can come from grass clippings, plant trimmings, kitchen scraps, and other fresh materials like animal manure and fresh leaves. Nitrogen provides the microbes and worms with proteins and nucleic acids to build their bodies. The ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio is 30:1, which means that there should be more materials that are rich in carbon rather than those rich in nitrogen. Here are some examples. Materials that are rich in carbon like dried leaves, hay, sawdust, and wood. Materials that are rich in nitrogen like animal manure, vegetable scraps, fruit waste, eggshells, rotten bread, and leftover food. Surface area. The greater the surface area the microorganisms have to work on, the faster the materials will decompose. Chopping and shredding the materials will make the compost less compact, giving the microorganisms more room to move around. Temperature. For purposes of composting, the warmer the temperature, the better. In a cool environment, the composting process slows down. The internal temperature of a compost pile is also important. When the process of decomposition is at its peak, the compost will tend to generate more heat. Moisture and aeration. All organisms, including compost microbes, need a certain amount of water and air to live. Microbes thus function best when the compost heap has many air passages and is about as moist as a wrung-out sponge. Extreme sunlight or rain can adversely affect this moisture balance. Do not cover compost piles with plastic or similar materials because these do not permit air to pass through. However, during wet weather, it is advisable that you cover the piles in order to avoid excessive moisture buildup. Now that you know all about the basic requirements, let us find out what organic materials you can use to start composting. The following items can be added to your compost pile. Grass or lawn clippings. Fresh grass clippings have high nitrogen content. Kitchen waste. Fruit and vegetable peels or rinds. Tea bags, coffee beans, eggshells, and similar materials are great compost materials. They tend to have high nitrogen content and are usually quite soft and moist. Hay. The greener the hay, the more nitrogen it contains. Be sure that any hay you plan to compost is well moistened before being added to the pile. Leaves. If you live in an area where leaves are thrown away as garbage, cash in on the bounty by acquiring your neighbor's leaves. Generally, leaves are an excellent compost ingredient. Dead, dry leaves have high carbon content, while living, green leaves contain abundant nitrogen. Manure. Horse, cow, sheep, and poultry manure are often available for free from local ranches, farms, and stables. Manure typically contains quite a bit of nitrogen. The fresher the manure, the more nitrogen it contains. Some manure, however, may contain weed seeds, which may be quite difficult to decompose. Fresh manure can make compost piles heat up quickly. This in turn will accelerate the decomposition of woody materials, leaves, and other materials that have high carbon content. Straw. Dry straw is good for keeping compost piles aerated because it tends to create lots of passageways for air to get into the pile. Be sure to wet the straw as it slowly decomposes. Straw has a high carbon content and needs to be mixed with materials that also have high nitrogen content in order for it to break down quickly. Weeds and other garden waste. Many types of weeds and old garden plants can be composted. Avoid weeds that have begun to form seeds because they may still grow and survive in your compost pile. Wood chips and sawdust. Wood products have high carbon content. Some sawdust, especially those from broad-leaved and deciduous trees, will break down quickly in an active compost pile. Take note that not all biodegradable materials can be composted. What not to compost? Avoid composting the following: chemically treated wood products. Sawdust is often available from construction sites and other building projects. If you are considering composting sawdust, be sure of its origin. Sawdust from chemically treated wood products can be a bad compost ingredient because the chemicals can be passed on to the compost. Diseased plants. Many disease-carrying microbes in plants can be killed if there is sufficient heat in your compost heap. However, it's difficult to make sure that every speck of the diseased material gets fully composted. It is thus best not to compost diseased plant materials at all. Human waste. Human feces can contain disease-carrying organisms that can make people very sick. Composting human feces should therefore not be attempted. Meat, bones, and fatty food waste. These materials are very attractive to pests, especially rats. In addition, fatty food waste break down very slowly because the fats prevent the air that microbes need to circulate in the compost pile. Pernicious weeds. Several kinds of plants and grasses can re-sprout from their roots and or stems in the compost pile. Just when you thought you had them all chopped up, you actually helped them multiply. Animal waste. Dog and cat feces may carry diseases that can infect humans. It is best never to use them in compost piles. Let's remember, composting has the following requirements: biological process, carbon and nitrogen, surface area, temperature, moisture and aeration. The following can be used in composting: grass and lawn clippings, hay, kitchen waste, leaves, manure, straw, weeds and other garden waste, wood chips and sawdust. The following materials should not be used in composting: chemically treated wood products, diseased plants, human waste, meat, bones, and fatty food waste, pernicious weeds, some animal waste like those of dogs and cats. That's the end of our lesson on what you need to make compost. See you on our next lesson.